Logic is an enemy and truth is a menace. Twilight Zone.
Hey guys, Alf here. I'm finally back with another Twilight Zone episode, or whatever you want to call this video. And it's been a while since I did the first one. With the holidays, I was kind of didn't have much time, and I'm also a bit of a slacker, so when I did have time, I ended up pushing it back. I also didn't know how to format this one and talk about what I'm going to talk about, but yeah, I figured I'd just wing it like I usually do. I don't know why I don't just do this right away. It always happens. If you haven't seen my the first video I did on this, you can go back and watch it. It's on my channel. I'll probably make a playlist eventually. And yeah, it's basically just general stuff about the Twilight Zone and also what the Twilight Zone meant to me as I was growing up. And, I watched it all my life. So, but this video is about Rodman Edward Serling, who you guys will know as Rod Serling, the inventor and writer, and one of the writers and directors and producers of the Twilight Zone. Yeah, he was this guy, dude's basically a fucking genius when it comes to writing, but we'll get to that. He was born on Christmas in 1924 in Syracuse, New York, to a Jewish family, immigrant family. But yeah, he basically grew up in the Great Depression. He grew up poor. He eventually joined the military and went to, during World War II. So he served during World War II. He went to, I think he was in the Philippines, New Guinea, like a lot of areas that he went to fight against Germans and the Japanese. And he saw a lot of fucked up shit. And this is around the time where he really started writing. And it was a way for him to basically cleanse the things he had seen. He had seen a lot of fucked up shit. He was at some place, I think in the Philippines, where half of his regiment was killed. It was like over 400 men. And yeah, he was a witness to this. He was one of the survivors. It was like half of his entire regiment was just annihilated. And it, he saw things that really traumatized him and bothered him. And that was a deep influence on him writing. And he's quoted as saying that I was bitter about everything and at loose ends when I got out of the service. I think I turned to writing to get it off my chest. So yeah, so him writing this stuff was a big part. If you watch Twilight Zone, you'll see there's a lot of military episodes and stuff like that. I think he was also a boxer in the military, and he did really well in that too. He's a big fan of boxing, and you'll see that influence as well in Twilight Zone. There's a couple of boxing episodes as well. But after the military, I think he was wounded, so he was discharged in 1946, and he had to go through rehabilitation and stuff like that. And yeah, he basically had a bum knee all his life because of it. I also want to say that Rod Serling grew up being a very insecure man. Like, he didn't. It's kind of I guess you could say it's kind of inspiring, because he grew up being a person who was very insecure and always afraid of what people thought and stuff like that, and didn't think he could, always put himself down, and didn't think he could do great things. But he wanted to do great things and be a great person and be known to the world so much that he fought through his insecurities and did what he had to do and worked tirelessly to become something that he, the things that he wanted to be, even though he felt he wasn't worthy of those things, but he did that, he worked hard and he did it, and he made it to become a household name at some point, Yeah, basically he got home from the military, he got married. He started working from his writing. He never stopped writing at that point. And from his writing, he started working for WNYC, a New York City radio station. He would write like really irrelevant stuff that wasn't important. Nobody really, it didn't capture anyone. He didn't do anything well with it. But, he wrote a lot of little like radio plays and stuff like that. And I don't know what you would call screenplays or teleplays for radio, but yeah, whatever that is. Eventually he moved from radio to television. He worked as a writer for WKRC TV in Cincinnati. He mostly wrote like testimonies for ads, stuff like that, and wrote a few scripts for television. Again, nothing big. But when he really got famous was in 1955. Well, let me not say famous, but when he really started to gain recognition was in 1955 when he wrote for a national syndicated television program called Kraft Television Theater. Yeah, with Kraft in the name, I think you know who sponsored that show, right? But yeah, this happened a lot in those days. In the 50s, there was 40s and 50s, there was a lot of TV shows that would be sponsored by companies, right? So you'd get like Kraft Television Theater, or Westinghouse, this and that and that. So companies would pay for these shows, and they were mostly anthology shows. Like every episode would just be a different story and this and that. And but in the end, they were just promoting their products. But yeah, in 55, he did a Kraft Television Theater. It was his 72nd script, so this guy wrote like crazy. But yeah, finally, I guess, like, if you're not gonna make it, you just gotta keep going, and that's what he did. He just was doing small potato stuff. A lot of his shit got rejected, and he just kept writing and writing and writing until he finally, bam, he got it in 1955. And this screenplay was called Patterns, and it became very well known. The audience reacted very well to it. They were asking for more from him, more stories from him. And let me talk about Patterns a little bit. But it's basically a live television drama starring Ed Begley, Everett Sloane, and Richard Kiley. Ed Begley, not to be confused with Ed Begley Jr., who's his son. But yeah, but it was basically a story about it was like a big business drama, right? It was about like execs and CEOs, and breaks down what's moral, what's not moral, and stuff. And it really struck a chord with people back in that time. And yeah, I don't know if he was a household name by this point, but people were starting to recognize him, and the stuff he was writing were starting to be the biggest hits or the biggest episodes of those shows. After that, his next big one was Requiem for a Heavyweight, which, obviously because of the name, you could tell that it was about a boxer. And the boxer was played by Jack Palance. It was basically a story of an old washed up boxer who was once, had a promising career, but now he's all washed up, and he gets savagely defeated by a younger boxer. And yeah, and it's basically deals with him trying to deal with the idea that he's a washed up fighter, if he should keep fighting, stuff like that. It's a drama, another drama. And it got tons of praise from critics back in 1956 when it premiered on Playhouse 90. That was another anthology type show of television dramas. After that success, and he started, really started becoming known, and people started wanting to hire him because, by this point he had written a few now one-off stories, screenplays that went into these anthology shows that were the biggest hits those shows had. And they're like, well, people are really liking this Rod Serling guy's script, let's start hiring him. So he decided to pick up his family and move over to California and yeah, work in Hollywood. But he started writing way more, and he was coming up, and he started seeing his name pop up on all these drama shows, and writing all these scripts, and they were starting to blow up. And but he saw a lot of, as you saw, a lot of these shows are ran by companies, and most of them were funded by sponsors. So he had a lot of problems with working with editors and censors. They always wanted to change his stories or add this, or, hey, can you throw this product in there? Or
here's an item we forgot. You see this? It holds a promise for anyone who smokes. It's Oasis. And as its name implies, it promises you the most refreshing, the softest taste of all. Try Oasis. I think you'll like it.
Can you change this product to another product? Because, we sell this, and that's kind of our competition. And, it really bothered him. He kept having to change things and say, oh, you can't talk about this because that's going to hurt our product and stuff like that. So it really bothered him. It started driving him nuts. And I'll give an example of this. There was, for Requiem for a Heavyweight, he had to delete a line from it where it said, got a match, where, I guess he had a cigarette and he wanted to light a cigarette, and he said, hey, you got a match in the screenplay. He had to delete that because one of the sponsors for Requiem for a Heavyweight was Ronson Lighters. So since they were selling lighters, they didn't want him to say got a match in the screenplay because matches are their competition, So I don't know. I'm not sure if he changed it to, you got a light and you got a lighter, or if he just took it out and just, had the guy light his own shit or something. Eventually, another story he wrote for Playhouse 90 was A Town That Has Turned to Dust. And this was one of the big ones where he realized the censorship was getting to be too much. This was about the Emmett Till case. Remember where it's an old case from the back in the day for a kid who got lynched for whistling at a white woman, a black kid, and he wanted to write a screenplay based on that, and the sponsors wouldn't allow him to do it, so he couldn't do it. And so what he decided to do was write his story, but make it take place in a completely different place and a different time. So he ended up making it a Western, but it's basically the same story of what really happened to the Emmett Till kid. And but he made it be all cowboys and stuff like that, and it worked. It got past the censors. Nobody thought about it as being like controversial or anything, and he got it through. But that was the point where he started realizing, like, I need to make my own show. The sponsors are changing my stories. This isn't working. I can't write what I want to write if the sponsors, well, if things become controversial, they won't let me write it, and to Rod Serling, these controversial things were important to him. So eventually he had an idea for a weekly show, which, ended up being the Twilight Zone. But at the time, I don't think it was called, he had the idea of calling it the Twilight Zone yet. He might have. But he decided to write this script called The Time Element, which he gave to CBS. CBS saw it, they liked it, and they decided to put it on air for a new show that came out that was produced by Desi Arnaz and Lucille Ball, and sponsored by Westinghouse. So it was called the Westinghouse Desilu Playhouse in 1958, and it was I'm gonna do my next video is gonna be a review and an analysis on that, on The Time Element. So I don't want to go too deep into it now. This was the first thing he put out that was very Twilight Zone-y. It has basically science fiction elements in it, and has to do with time and stuff. But yeah, it was a huge hit. It totally got a positive response from the fans. They loved it. And yeah, that's where he got the go-ahead to start making the Twilight Zone. He ended up not having The Time Element be the pilot, because it was supposed to be the pilot for the show, but it ended up not being the pilot, and he made another pilot for the show because the show ended up being different, right? Time Element's an hour long, and Twilight Zone ended up being half-hour episodes. So yeah, so he made another pilot, and that ended up not being a pilot, but it's kind of looked at as being technically the pilot for the Twilight Zone, just not officially, right? The Twilight Zone was not taken seriously before it came out. When people found out he got a show and it was the Twilight Zone, it was going to be science fiction based, they thought of it as being goofy. All the science fiction shows and horror anthology shows and stuff like that, they're out in the time, science fiction theater, thriller, Tales of Tomorrow, stuff like that, were all very much, I mean, they weren't goofy, but they weren't serious stories. They were, goofy, not goofy, but, sci-fi stories that mostly just handled sci-fi. There was nothing deep about them usually and stuff like that. It's mostly for fun, right? But the Twilight Zone, he was doing something different in order to get around. It was his grand idea. He got his own show in order to get around the sponsors and editors and censors that wanted to stop him from doing controversial topics or just wanting him to do certain things that he didn't want to do or change his scripts. He decided, basically from the Emmett Till one, he basically decided, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take these stories I write about controversial topics, social commentaries, and things that people, that sponsors wouldn't let you normally do, and I'm going to hide them under the guise of science fiction. So he would write these crazy science fiction stories, but if you look into the story and pay attention to the story, you realize that it's more of like a fable that tells you that gives you social commentary, or talks about the human condition, and or maybe topical, contemporary social commentary of the time, and all controversial topics and stuff like that, and they would just be hidden in there, and they wouldn't, the sponsors would just let it go because it was because they just looked at sci-fi as being, sci-fi is goofy, nobody's gonna take this seriously. But yeah, he got away with doing a lot of things, and he's a very smart guy. He wrote very smart stories. And it was a genius idea at the time to do that, to hide these great stories that he had within the context of science fiction. But yeah, that brings me to this interview he had right before, because at this point, Rod Serling was a household name. He had written so many scripts and for all these anthology shows, and they'd all blown up. And so he had an interview on television where they're talking to him, and he gets asked. The interviewer asks him, You know, and it's a funny reaction. The interview, like he didn't see it coming. The interview asks him, like, you know, oh, you wrote all these, you know, you've been writing all these serious scripts. How's it feel to like now have a show that's not serious? You know, like basically, I don't know if the interviewer meant to be insulting, but it's kind of insulting. Like it was telling, oh, you got your own show and now you're gonna do this childish, you know, science fiction stuff. You know, basically saying like, damn, you wrote all these serious drama stories and now you're gonna do this kid stuff. But it's funny because Rod Serling responds. Like, you know, he responds like he agrees with him, and then he's like, oh, wait, you know, like, and then he starts telling him, like, no, this is a serious show.
But in 18 scripts, that's the only conflict we've had.
Well,
They've passed
what?
I mean, every script.
Is pre-censorship, though, involved? Are you simply writing easy?
In this particular area, no, because we're dealing with a half-hour show, which cannot probe like a 90, which doesn't use scripts as vehicles of social criticism. These are strictly for entertainment.
These are pot boilers.
Oh, no, I wouldn't call them pot boilers at all. No, these are very adult, I think high-quality, half-hour, extremely polished films. But because they deal in the areas of fantasy and imagination and science fiction and all of those things, there's no opportunity to cop a plea or chop an axe or anything.
Well, you're not going to be able to cop a plea or chop an axe because you're going to be obviously working so hard on the Twilight Zone that in essence, for the time being and for the foreseeable future, you've given up on writing anything important for television, right?
Yeah, for the...
In essence, for the time being and for the foreseeable future, you've given up on writing anything important for television, right?
Yeah, well, again, this is a semantic thing. Important for television, I don't know. If by important you mean I'm not going to try to delve into current social problems dramatically, you're quite right, I'm not.
You're not understanding, you know, and it's going to be a very important show. And it's funny that he knew it was going to be a very important show, and it was, and it ended up being what he... This is the crazy thing about him being the kind of guy who was insecure but would strive for nothing more than the best, you know, to be the best. And that's what he did, and he had the... Even though he was insecure, he had the confidence in this at this point. He was like, no, I'm going to make the show and it's going to be important. You know, it's going to be a very important show. When people see this, they're going to understand why it's an important show. And he was right. He was on the money. But you know, nobody took Twilight Zone seriously right away. They all thought it was going to be a goofy sci-fi show, like in the vein of science fiction theater and Tales of Tomorrow and stuff like that. But yeah, that's basically the story of Rod Serling. Maybe between seasons, I'll go into him more of what happened to him after the Twilight Zone or the things during the Twilight Zone. But if you don't know, you know, he did another show after the Twilight Zone called Night Gallery. He wrote the screenplay for Planet of the Apes, even though it was taken from and completely twisted and changed. But yeah, the Twilight Zone had a good 5-series run. Even after that, it was canceled and they wanted to bring it back like the next year. And he refused and sold off the Twilight Zone, which is the worst thing I think he did. But I think he was done with it by that point. After 5 seasons, he had worked tirelessly on this show, really hard. And I think he was just done with it at that point. Yeah, I think he was just done with the turmoil at that point. I mean, as the Twilight Zone went on and seasons went later on, he started losing more and more control. And by the end, he was like, all right, I'm done. You know, this has become something that this isn't what I started with. You know, it becomes something else and it got taken over. And if he just brought it back, you know, and he was, you know, it'd probably be even less control. So he wasn't having it. And he just ended it there and said, you know what, you guys can have, you know, told CBS, here you go. You know, I'll sell you the Twilight Zone. I don't want it anymore. You guys do with it what you want. So, yeah, that's basically the story of Rod Serling. He's an amazing guy, a genius writer, and a very important figure in our history, entertainment history, television history. Check out Patterns, Requiem for a Heavyweight, The Time Element, especially if you're into Twilight Zone stuff, which is what I will be doing next. So I'll catch you guys next time. Thanks for watching, and watch the Twilight Zone.
In his own twisted and distorted lexicon, he calls it faith, strength, truth. But in just a moment, Peter Vollmer will apply his...